Houston's severe weather, storms hitting harder and more often. The KPRC 2 weather team breaks down what to expect in 2022. Generator Industries and MapNext.org present KPRC 2's Hurricane and Flood Survival Guide.
Good evening. I'm KPRC2 Chief Meteorologist Frank Billingsley. Hurricane season 2022 is here. For all of us here in the Gulf Coast region, it's time to be vigilant and to get prepared. And our team is here to help. In the last 5 years alone, we have faced Hurricane Harvey, Tropical Storm Imelda, Hurricane Laura, and Hurricane Nicholas. And of course, it doesn't take a hurricane for floodwaters to hit Houston. So we're going to show you some vulnerable areas and what's being done to help keep everyone safe. We've got critical information for you, things you need to know if in the event we have severe weather, like evacuation zones, how to use a generator safely, how to prepare your hurricane kit, and more. The KPRC2 weather team will also take you on a deep dive into how hurricanes form and how flash flooding happens here. So whether you're new to the area or you've weathered many storms with us, we have resources and information in this next hour that will make you more informed and ready for what's ahead this hurricane season. And now here's Justin Stapleton with a look at some of Houston's most memorable weather events.
First on our list is the infamous Galveston storm of 1900, named the deadliest weather disaster in U.S. history. The storm surge swallowed Galveston Island with 8 to 12 feet of water. In response, the iconic 17-foot seawall was built. In 1915, a second hurricane struck Galveston with a 16-foot storm surge, but the wall held and still holds to this day. Nearly 50 years later, the coast was slammed by Hurricane Carla in 1961, then again by Hurricane Alicia in 1983, which brought on $6 billion in damages. Now let's flash forward to 2001. Tropical Storm Allison flooded Houston, dropping over 35 inches of rain, proving even tropical storms can be devastating. In 2008, the eye of Hurricane Ike passed through downtown Houston, destroying skyscrapers and knocking out power for weeks. And most recently, in 2017, Hurricane Harvey drenched southeast Texas with more than 50 inches of rain over 5 days. We'll dive deeper into some of our historic storms later in the show, but for now, let's send it over to Chief Meteorologist Frank Billingsley for a look at what we can expect this hurricane season.
So let's have a look at the 2022 hurricane season forecast. NOAA, the National Hurricane Center, is predicting 14 to 21 named storms. Of those, 6 to 10 would become hurricanes. Of those, 3 to 6 would be major. That's Category 3 or higher. Colorado State's been doing this since 1984. They're very well respected, and their forecast is right in line, 19, 9, and 4. The average is 14, 7, and 3. So an above normal season is forecast. Last year, we had almost exactly the same thing at 21, 7, and 4. And statistically, we have a 65% chance for this above normal season. Why? One reason is La Nina. That's cool water in the Pacific. The opposite is El Nino, warm water in the Pacific, and that warm water creates wind that goes across Central America and tears up storms developing in the Caribbean. But we don't have that. We have the cool water rather than the warm water. Where we have the warm water is where we don't want it, and that's the Gulf, the Caribbean, and the Atlantic, and it's already above normal, and that's what fuels these storms. In addition, the monsoon winds are strong this year coming out of the Atlantic into Africa. That monsoon wind has moisture. That's going to create more storms that come off of Africa and have a very good chance of becoming hurricanes. So here's a look at the outlook. The forecast is for an above normal season. Remember, it's not a landfall forecast. We had 28 storms in 2005 and none of them hit Texas. What to do? Make your plans now. Let's go to meteorologist Anthony Yanes to tell us exactly how these hurricanes form.
The eye of a hurricane. Seeing this from space brings a feel of beauty and dread for those in its path. But how do these ocean monsters form? Come down here with me. It all starts with one drop of rain, one lone thunderstorm. Because of the spin of the Earth, a circulation starts. But you must have the right ingredients to get beyond this point. So hurricane season is from June 1st to November 30th. That's because that's when the ocean temperatures in the northern hemisphere are at 80 degrees. But it's not just the surface of the ocean. The water has to be 80 degrees to 150 feet deep. Now that's the water. You also need the upper levels of the atmosphere to be colder than the ground. Air has to cool with height, like climbing a mountain. If there's an inversion above the water or warmer temperatures above the ground, a storm will struggle to form. The winds need to cooperate too. They need to be out of the same speed and direction from the ground to 5,000 feet. If you have upper level winds that come from a different direction, that's called wind shear, and that will kill a storm or prevent it from strengthening. But if everything is perfect, a hurricane will form and strengthen. These ingredients are like a car. You need good tires, a good engine, and plenty of gas for that car to go. And warm waters are a hurricane's fuel, and it can rapidly intensify hurricanes. Meteorologist Caroline Brown shows us the impact of climate change and the tropics.
Let's talk about the Gulf waters because they've been heating up. In fact, we've been warmer than average for about the past month. In early May, Gulf temperatures were about 85 degrees Fahrenheit. That's enough to support tropical development, and this has been happening a lot more in the recent years. In fact, this is tied to climate change. Within the past 2 decades, every single year, we've been warmer than average. Prior to that, always cooler. Now, you might see this and think, well, it's just 1.5 degrees above average, but think of the Earth like your body. 1.5 degrees is the difference between being perfectly healthy and having a fever, and right now, it's like the Earth has a fever. How does this translate to tropical systems? Well, it means that we're starting to see more tropical systems. In fact, in the 1850s, it was unheard of to imagine seeing 12 named systems in a season. Now, that's actually our average. And in 2020, we had 30 named systems in one season. Not only are we seeing more named systems, we're also seeing stronger named systems as well. Take a look at major hurricanes per year. In 2020, we saw 6 major hurricanes. That's a category 3 or greater. And it's not just over the past 200 years they're getting stronger, even in the past 40 years. In the late 70s, only about 10 to 20% of hurricanes that formed became major hurricanes. But take a look, 2015 to 2017, about 40% of all hurricanes that formed went through rapid intensification, and we were able to see major hurricanes. So in short, climate change is making things a lot worse for the tropical season. Warmer oceans are increasing hurricane strength. We're having more systems and they're getting stronger. Warmer air actually holds more moisture. That means we can see heavier rainfall, more prolonged rainfall events, and more major flooding events. Finally, rising sea levels, that's been bringing more intense storm surge, and we've seen storm surge of greater than 25 feet. So unless something changes, our hurricane seasons are going to continue to get worse. Now let's go to meteorologist Cambrell Marshall for a look at this year's hurricane names.
2022 will provide 21 names for consideration for our tropical storms and hurricanes, from Alex all the way down to Walter. We hope we won't see Walter. By the way, of those names, we've probably seen some before. Alex is one we saw back in 2010. It was a Category 2 hurricane. Bonnie is another storm. Back in 1986, a Category 1 hurricane made landfall in High Island. 22,000 people were evacuated as a result. Danielle, back in 1980, was a tropical storm, made landfall near Galveston, $25 million in damage. The most recent one was Hermine, which back in 2010 was a tropical storm, made landfall near Matamoros, over 16 inches of rain in the Texas Hill Country as a result of that. Obviously, we hope we don't run through all 21 names on this year's storm list, but if we do, instead of the Greek alphabet of a couple of years ago, they've been replaced with names. Obviously, we hope we never ever get to see Adria.
Throughout the hour, I'll be asking trivia questions to determine if you're a Gulf genius or a Whirlpool wannabe. Let's get started. Which month is the most active for tropical storms and hurricanes? Is it A, August, B, September, C, October? We'll have the answer after the break. And now here's the answer to our weather trivia question. The correct answer is B. September is the most active month for tropical storms and hurricanes because that's when the ocean water is the warmest. Peak hurricane season is typically considered between mid-August and mid-October. Welcome back to KPRC2's Hurricane and Flood Survival Guide. With climate change and erosion, coastal areas like ours could look very different in just the next 30 years. Right now, we're going to break down what future flooding looks like for our area. We begin with KPRC2 investigator Joel Eisenbaum.
You have most likely endured a few of them. Rita, Ike, Harvey, those names mean something different to us. And so far we've bounced back, and we've been doing it since 1900.
You simply cannot deny the creative power of people in the aftermath of storms.
But Mother Nature keeps coming at us. The current curse word, Nicholas.
It's a lot worse than what I expected it would be.
The big ones, the hurricanes. They're tangible, painful reminders of nature's power. But something else appears to be threatening us.
Climate change is real. It's happening right now. It's because of us, and it's mattering for coastal communities that are seeing increases in water levels around their coastlines.
Dr. Daniel Guilford is a climate scientist sounding the alarm. His group, Climate Central, is dedicated, they say, to helping families, businesses, and governments understand the consequences of global warming. For our region, they tell us that means by the year 2050, our coastline will be underwater. Climate Central created this map to help better explain the problem. Large swaths of Galveston, Bolivar, Tiki Island, Kemah, underwater. But it won't happen overnight. So-called nuisance flooding will gradually get worse and worse.
So a few inches, 6 inches, 8 inches of water that we're seeing with sea level rise could really make a big difference for coastal communities such as Galveston.
Here's the thing. If you believe these maps, you don't have to be on the coast to be in trouble. How many times have you flooded?
Oh, my goodness. 19, 20 times here.
The Sullivans, John and Mary, have uncommon durability. They live along Clear Creek in League City. Technically, it's a fresh body of water, but with tides, it floods like heck. Their house was raised 11.5 feet, a whole extra story, and still flooded during Harvey.
We actually had 2 feet on the second level, because this house now is 3 levels. We actually had to be rescued. We actually had to go over the side, so to speak.
As for Nicholas, the mucky water stayed under the house, and it needed a good cleanup. The map puts the Sullivan's Creekside Oasis underwater by 2050. So what to do about that, John?
I'm not an engineer, but they were able to do it in Louisiana. I'm sure they can do it here.
Galveston did, in fact, already do it a century ago when it built the seawall.
It is still today one of the most monumental feats of civil engineering that has ever been accomplished in the history of our country.
In the long term, an upgrade is in the works for the coastline with the Ike Dike Coastal Spine, a protective barrier which this map does not take into account. In the short term, when it comes to that nuisance flooding, Kimber says islanders somewhat take it in stride.
We have to do the best with what we've got, with what's right in front of us, and take that as far as we can.
As Joel just showed us, flooding is a growing problem around the Houston area. And families who've just moved here, especially from the West Coast, probably aren't used to our short duration, high intensity rain we're so prone to get. Harris County Flood Control District meteorologist Jeff Linder explains why flooding should be everyone's concern.
Our floodplains are drawn based on our creeks and bayous and rivers. So it's water coming out of the creeks and bayous and rivers, and it's inundating that land next to those creeks and bayous. But a lot of our flooding, house flooding, structure flooding, comes from these street systems that get overwhelmed when we get these really big rainfalls. These 5-6 inches an hour overwhelms our street drainage systems, and you can get water in the homes. And there's no floodplain mapping for those homes. This is why we ask everybody to have flood insurance. If you're in a floodplain, if you're not in a floodplain, we ask everybody to have flood insurance.
If you don't have flood insurance, now is the time to get it. Amy Davis explains what you need to know about insurance and what it covers.
Regular homeowners insurance doesn't cover flooding. Usually your mortgage lender only requires you to purchase flood insurance if you live in a designated flood zone. But during Hurricane Harvey, it didn't matter where you lived. A lot of homes that had never flooded before did. And about 80% of those victims didn't have flood insurance. Right now, FEMA says there are just over 142,000 flood policies in Houston through the National Flood Insurance Program. Prices just went up April 1st. And right now, the average flood insurance policy is $894 a year. You could pay less if your home is not in a floodplain, or more depending on your flood risk. But no matter what you pay out, the maximum amount you can receive for damages is $250,000 to rebuild and $100,000 to replace personal property like TVs and furniture. The average flood insurance claim over the last 5 years was about $68,000, and 40% of those claims came from people whose homes were not in high-risk flood zones. So ask yourself, if you have $68,000 to cover flood damage if you choose not to buy insurance. If the answer is no, buying it now is a safe bet. Most policies take 30 days to go into effect. And you may be able to get private flood insurance that would pay you more to rebuild. You can check rates by calling private flood insurance companies, but you should also check their ratings and reviews. Private flood policies are fairly new and haven't been tested after a large flood event like Hurricane Harvey. I'm Amy Davis, KPRC 2 News.
Thanks, Amy. Still ahead, Justin Stapleton explains how we get flash flooding. And we're checking out the Houston Fire Department's new high water rescue trucks. Let's test your severe weather knowledge. Which state has been hit by more tropical storms and hurricanes than any other state? Is it A, Texas, B, Louisiana, or C, Florida? The answer when we come back.
The KPRC 2 Hurricane and Flood Survival Guide is sponsored by Generator Industries and mapnext.org.
Which state has been hit by more tropical storms and hurricanes than any other state? The correct answer is C, Florida. Because Florida's a peninsula. It's very vulnerable from tropical systems in both the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic Ocean. Texas comes in second, with Louisiana being the third most hit state. An intense amount of rain over a very short period of time, what we refer to as a training event. It happened to hit one area of Sugar Land hard in 2019. KPRC2 meteorologist Cambrell Marshall shows us the impacts of that one heavy rain and what's being done right now to help make sure that families in that neighborhood don't experience that kind of flooding again.
One of the big concerns in any hurricane season is the potential for flooding. By the way, it doesn't have to be hurricane season to flood. Experts will tell us that almost any home in our community should have flood insurance. Nowhere was that more obvious than in this Great Woods section of Sugar Land, where houses on both sides of me were flooded. May 7th, 2019 is a day homeowners in Greatwood won't soon forget.
It was just, a typical afternoon heavy rainstorm that just kept on going and going and going into the evening.
John Watts lost 2 cars to floodwaters that day. And for the first time since these homes were built in the early 1990s, 11 homes flooded, with about 30 more neighbors sustaining flood damage in their garages.
You predicted, you said there's some cells moving through, some will be more extreme than other. Well, we happened to get the one that was real extreme, and then it just parked.
Now, this is a really good example of what's happened. This is 6 hours. These showers come in, and look how they build behind there, what we call back building. They just continue to generate over the same spot.
You get that kind of rainfall in that short a period of time, all of it concentrated. You don't design systems to handle that kind of a rainfall. I mean, there aren't any.
It was here in this community on this corner in 2019. It was hammered by rain, a training event, storms over this same area, dropping 13 inches of rain within 6 or 7 hours.
Harvey in 2017, which was fairly easy for us. It was a lot of water. We didn't lose power. It just rained and rained and rained for days, but the water level didn't get anywhere near what that storm in 2019 did.
The unprecedented flood event for this neighborhood prompted the city of Sugar Land to get to work on drainage improvements.
We moved pretty quick. Everybody has a right to live in a house that doesn't structurally flood. And so even though the streets are designed to hold water, last thing we want is water in somebody's house.
The Great Wood Village project, we actually replacing about 3,000 feet of storm sewer, and also replace all the inlets, all the existing older type inlets in the neighborhood.
The $3 million Great Wood Village drainage project, targeted for completion in November, is part of a larger $90 million voter-approved bond project. Right now, Sugar Land has 10 drainage improvement projects underway across the city.
So by enlarge the underground storm sewer system, so we can increase the capacity, storing more water underground, and the in-place inlets can help the water drain faster as well.
Ultimately, the neighborhood's drainage depends on Brazos River levels, but improvements like these could prevent flooding like what happened here in 2019.
Once it's done, it's going to be really nice. People really appreciate the work City of Sugar Land has been doing.
Thanks, Cambrell. Let's talk about flash flooding now. That's when flooding occurs within 6 hours or often within 3 hours of extremely heavy rainfall. It occurs so quickly that oftentimes people get caught off guard. In locations where there's a lot of concrete, similar to what we have here in Houston, the water can't infiltrate the ground, runs off into low-lying areas, and starts to fill up. This can cause high, fast-moving water on the roads. Always stay out of floodwaters. And here's why. A foot of water can float most vehicles like you see here. 2 feet of water can float most vehicles, including SUVs and pickups. If you're in a business or a home, the water may rise quickly and can trap you inside, which is why it's so important to have a way to get information. And that information comes in the way of flood alerts. A flood watch means just that. Watch out. Weather conditions are favorable for heavy rain. That means it may not necessarily be happening, but the conditions are there that it could. Different than a flood warning, the more serious of the two, it means it's happening right now. Seek higher ground and always turn around and don't drown. A great resource that we have for you is our KPRC 2 flood tracker. It's an exclusive flood tracker with our partnership at Harris County Flood Control District. You can get real-time flood conditions about flood gauges, stream status, current rainfall, and of course get alerted if flooding is happening in your neighborhood down to the block. Not only that, but it gives you an opportunity to see what's happening in the stream status in your closest river, creek, or bayou. Again, that's the KPRC 2 flood tracker at clickthehouston.com flood tracker, or you can pull out your phone and scan the QR code right here on the screen. Now let's get over to Keith Garvin with the new high water vehicles from the Houston Fire Department made to help save lives this hurricane season. Keith?
The Houston Fire Department is in the business of saving lives, and during flood events, they need to be able to get to people who are stranded in high water.
Post-Harvey, we've added quite a bit to our fleet.
With 21 boats, military-grade rescue vehicles, and now 6 of these brand-new F-550 rescue trucks that have been in action for just the last few weeks.
When we pull the skid out, we flip the seats up, and now it's in the high water configuration, and we can carry 10 people out.
When we're not facing a flood threat, these trucks are equipped to fight grass fires.
This vehicle right now is in the grass fire configuration. So during a flood event, we will take this. You can see we've got forklift holes in here. We pull this whole skid out. What's in here right now is 300 gallons of water. On top of there's also another 10 gallons of foam. So that special foam that we use to make sure we put the grass fires out.
15 stations in the Houston area are trained to use these high water rescue vehicles. Those include flood-prone areas like Station 86 near Addicks Reservoir and Bear Creek Park. The trucks can also tow rescue boats and handle all kinds of terrain in up to 2 feet of water. Captain Moreno tells us these trucks will also be deployed to help fight wildfires across Texas.
We went to Bastrop already. They went to Edinburgh. We have some guys that just came back from the Mesquite heat fire. The Houston Fire Department is all over the state right now helping other Texans.
Keith Garvin, KPRC 2 News.
Thank you, Keith. Those high water rescue trucks could definitely help save lives. Still ahead, I'll show you how the Texas Medical Center prepares for the impacts of severe weather while attending to the needs of their most critical patients. Plus, the zones and routes that you need to know to get out safely in case hurricane evacuations are called. We'll be right back. Let's see if you know the answer to this trivia question. Dust from the Saharan Desert moving over the Atlantic Ocean will do what to tropical systems? Will it A, weaken or kill them, B, make them stronger, or C, have no effect on storms? Find out after the break. Welcome back. Dust from the Saharan Desert moving over the Atlantic Ocean will do what to tropical systems? The correct answer is A. It's hard to predict how much dust will move over the Atlantic during the season, but there have been years it has really suppressed hurricane activity. We'll see if it impacts us for the 2022 season. The Texas Medical Center is one of the most thriving in the entire world. Millions of people count on it every year. But just like everybody else, the Texas Medical Center faces floods and freezes and high winds and hurricanes. So how does the Texas Medical Center make sure they stay open? It's home to the world's largest children's hospital and the world's largest cancer hospital. A baby is born here every 20 minutes, and more than 100,000 employees work here. A lot of people depend on the Texas Medical Center for life-saving health care, and they've been impacted by some of Houston's toughest storms.
Allison was a pretty tough event for the medical center. A lot of research lost, a lot of basements flooded, right? The economic damage and the sort of physical damage was pretty extensive. Yeah. So since then, the ground plane has been built up significantly. Some of those improvements like flood logs and floodgates and that sort of thing have been put in place. During Harvey, there was flooding, and we did shut down some of our garages and so forth, but we maintained full operations during Harvey, and so we were able to keep all the patient care going, and some of that sort of shelter in place did take place. But
so those places that flooded during Allison did not flood during Harvey?
That's right. The basements of most of these buildings did flood during Allison. None of them flooded during Harvey, and to the extent that anything did flood, it was very, very insignificant.
A big payoff that kept damage from other storms at a minimum and kept operations going. So what happens if you or someone you love is at a hospital in the medical center during a major severe weather event?
Our doctors, our nurses, and all of our facilities folks, they ride out the storm here. They've got food, water, and clothes. The patients that end up here with us, they get to ride it out sometimes too, right? And so we've got restaurants, we've got food stores, right? We're all in this together, right? So we're providing that food, water, and shelter for folks who are here.
They're also making the most of technology to keep an eye on flood levels so they can react.
So we have a network of camera sensors throughout the bayou and also throughout our entire campus. And we work with Rice University as well to sort of predict the flooding and the flood recession by the levels in the bayou. So a combination of the sensors and the widening of the bayou allows it, one, to reduce the flooding, but two, to allow us to react in a really thoughtful way during the course of these events.
The Texas Medical Center executive team stresses the importance of preparation and communication. They encourage patients to check their website and social media for real-time updates in the event of an emergency.
When a hurricane strikes in our area, it's important to know your evacuation zone and be ready. Families in the purple zone closest to the Gulf Coast will be the first to be told to evacuate. If the storm is strong enough, expect the yellow zone to get the evacuation order next, followed by the green and orange zones. It's important to note that a big part of our region is not an evacuation zone and would be encouraged not to get out on the road. Families in those areas should stay put to ride out the storm. This is important so we don't see a repeat of the Hurricane Rita evacuation in 2005 when dangerous gridlock on highways sadly resulted in lives lost. If evacuations are called, wide shoulders on some highways will become evacu lanes, creating an extra lane for traffic. CONTRAFLOW lanes are also possible, and that's when inbound highway lanes are reversed, so both sides of the highway go the same direction. If you live in an evacuation zone but are not able to leave on your own, register for evacuation assistance now by calling 211. This is something you have to do every year. I'm KPRC 2 traffic expert Anna Reyes. Stay safe.
Every tropical storm season, it's time to familiarize ourselves with the watches and warnings we will be talking about throughout the season. Whether it's a tropical storm or a hurricane, same sort of scenario applies. Watches and warnings mean two different things. Now, with a watch, it means that dangerous conditions are possible. A threat is within 48 hours or less. Time to do your final preparations. Time to note, you need to do your preparations in general well before you have to deal with a watch or a warning. The watch tells you have 48 hours or less. The warning means dangerous conditions are expected pretty quickly, within 36 hours or less. Time now to follow the authorities' instructions. Be ready to act right now.
Coming up next, it's been almost 5 years since Hurricane Harvey. We'll take a look at some of the progress that's been made since that monster storm. Here's more weather trivia for you. The category of a hurricane is a measure of its A, fastest winds, B, central pressure, C, storm size. We'll be right back with that answer.
The KPRC2 Hurricane and Flood Survival Guide is sponsored by Generator Industries and mapnext.org.
Welcome back. The category of a hurricane is a measure of its what? The correct answer is A. The Saffir-Simpson scale rates hurricanes on fastest winds. For more information on how hurricanes are rated, stick around. We'll break down the categories in just a few minutes. Nearly 5 years have passed since Hurricane Harvey slammed our area. More than 50 inches of rain fell here over 5 days, causing widespread flooding that destroyed homes and businesses. Half a decade later, progress is still being made.
There's no denying many communities look a whole lot different now. Right here in Meyerland, for example, many of the homes have been raised up like this one, hopefully to avoid future flood damage. After a whole series of flooding events, including Harvey, this home elevation was the best option. Other FEMA flood prevention projects include extensive channel repairs and dam improvements. You may remember the Kingwood Lake Houston area was among the hardest hit during Harvey. The San Jacinto River overflow, flooding thousands of homes in that area. In fact, dredging up and down the waterway is still going on. Federal, state, and local funding totaling more than $220 million for various dredging projects. There's been millions of yards of sediment already moved out with the goal of giving the lake more capacity. All of those dredging projects expected to be complete by 2024. We're also seeing more work done to replace affordable homes that were lost during Harvey. This April, a new housing community opened in North Houston at Hartwood and West Little York. The Harvey Multifamily Program has a budget of $450 million and is supposed to support 38 developments and create more than 4,300 new rental homes. I'm here at 2100 Memorial, where during Harvey, some 40 feet of floodwater came rushing in. A huge senior living center was destroyed. Now, new construction is underway. The new center, it is said, will have 200 different units and be an affordable place for seniors to live. I'm Bill Spencer, KPRC 2 News.
The leading cause of fatalities during 2020's Hurricane Laura wasn't due to storm surge or falling debris. It was attributed to carbon monoxide poisoning from portable generators that were used without proper ventilation. If the power goes out and you need to keep your refrigerator or life-saving medical equipment up and running, here's what you need to know to do it safely. Portable generators emit a highly toxic, odorless, colorless gas called carbon monoxide, which is deadly.
Under no circumstances should anybody run it inside a garage or inside a building, even with the windows open. You also need to keep it at least 20 feet away from any occupied dwelling. We always recommend installing a battery-powered carbon monoxide detector.
Homeowners can also purchase a standby generator, which powers on automatically when your electricity goes out.
From a safety standpoint, a home standby generator is far safer than a portable.
Now we'll send it over to meteorologist Justin Stapleton. He has a look at the storm that would forever change Galveston and more of the severe weather events that we'll never forget.
The names that are etched in our memory: Carla, Ike, Harvey. The most destructive hurricanes in Houston's history. But the deadliest storm, the one that came in 1900, before we even started naming hurricanes, changed Galveston forever.
So without a doubt, the 1900 storm was probably the most pivotal thing in Galveston's history. But its impact really is national. It's still recorded as the largest loss of human life of any natural disaster in the United States history.
Some estimates say 8,000 lives were lost in that storm, maybe even more. In response, Galveston's iconic 17-foot seawall was built.
Coordinated with this seawall, however, was the grade raising of the island. And so 500 city blocks were elevated in Galveston. Properties were lifted up. Depending on where you were on that slope, you were lifted up.
The seawall and raising of the island would help curb the devastation of the 1900 storm in future events like 1961's Hurricane Carla. Then in 2008, Hurricane Ike brought intense flooding that destroyed homes and businesses.
The destruction to buildings was water coming in. It was 13 feet of water on some of the Strand properties, and so pretty much everything was destroyed on the first floor of those buildings.
It also changed the landscape of the island, with trees on a large portion of Galveston Island dying from sitting in polluted floodwaters for an extended period of time. About 50 miles inland, Houston has also seen its fair share of nature's wrath. In 2017, Hurricane Harvey jumped into the record books, bringing devastating flooding across Houston, including here in downtown along Buffalo Bayou, and it blew out the old Spaghetti Warehouse building behind me. 50 inches of rain fell in just 5 days during Hurricane Harvey. It's a storm from which many Houstonians are still recovering. It's just a matter of time before the next unforgettable storm, and we'll do our best to keep you informed and safe. Now let's send it back to Chief Meteorologist Frank Billingsley in the studio.
Let's talk about the Saffir-Simpson hurricane wind scale. We'll start with the Cat 1. That was Nicholas last year. Just 75-mile-an-hour winds, but did a number on Matagorda County and the coast. So don't underestimate a Category 1 storm. Category 2 then starts at 96 and goes to 110-mile-an-hour winds. And that was Ike back in 2008, which not only brought in a huge storm surge that decimated Bolivar, but also knocked out the power to Houston for 3 weeks. So Cat 1 and Cat 2 may not sound like major storms, but they can absolutely do major damage. Back in 1983, we had Alicia. That was a Category 3. 115-mile-an-hour winds with that one and a 10-foot storm surge into Galveston. And then a Category 4, that gets us right to 130. That was Harvey into Rockport in 2017. Although it stalled, we got the effects of all of the rain and the floods, but the wind was devastating to the Rockport community. Then we look at a Category 5, which those don't hit Texas particularly. We don't have any on record, but they can come close, as you know, with Carla back in 1961, and then just last year, Ida was almost a 5 as it moved into the Louisiana area. So these are the Saffir-Simpson hurricane winds. Surge was taken out of this after Ike. Surge is different, but keep in mind, the stronger the winds and the longer they are over water, the higher and more deadly the surge can be. Here's another test of your weather smarts. In 1943, Major Joe Duckworth was the first person to fly a plane into a hurricane. Why did he do it? A, he was ordered to. B, he did it on a bet. Or C, he was a test pilot. We'll have the answer when we come back. In 1943, Major Joe Duckworth was the first person to fly a plane into a hurricane. Why did he do it? Well, the correct answer is B. Major Joe Duckworth won that bet and successfully flew through a hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico, and he did it twice that day. He's considered a pioneer for gathering tropical data via a plane. Ike made landfall over Galveston as a Category 2 hurricane in 2008. Flooding from that storm made it one of the costliest in U.S. history, with $38 billion in damage. KPRC 2 meteorologist Anthony Yanis shows us how much has changed since then.
Since 1900, Galveston Island has been hit by 5 destructive hurricanes, the most recent being Ike in 2008. Now, if that same storm hit today, it would cause a lot more flooding. The city of Galveston has had quite the turbulent past when it comes to tropical systems. There are 94 high water marks from storms since 1880.
NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, came out with a report. They analyzed sea level rise projections for 8 regions of the U.S., and the region with the greatest sea level rise is right here in the western Gulf of Mexico.
Hal Needham is a climate data and natural hazard scientist. He took those sea level rise projections and mapped out the entire city of Galveston.
This house here stayed dry during Hurricane Ike by about 3 inches. Unfortunately, if the same Hurricane Ike hit this year, this house would go from dry to wet. Getting out to mid-century, this type of house would have about 1.5 feet of water in it from the same Hurricane Ike.
The reason for the sea level rise probably isn't what you think.
A lot of coastal Texas is sinking or subsiding, and sea level rates are rising as well. And so if the same Ike came in this year, it would flood about 4% more buildings. But a report from NOAA showing sea level rise into the future shows about 20% more buildings would flood by mid-century if the same Hurricane Ike hit around the year 2050.
You often hear projections of 1 to 3 inches. That may not seem like a lot, but when you look at Hurricane Ike watermarks, that increase now puts water in many of these homes. Solutions to this problem are costly and radical.
I think elevating houses, thinking through this, improving drainage as well, and then even creative means. I mean, I know in some parts of the world they're actually doing floating houses now and floating communities.
And now, KPRC2's Zach Lajway shows us how oyster shells could be the key to stopping erosion on Galveston's coastline.
Its water is a mix between salt and fresh. It's unusually shallow for its size.
Ooh, the water is low today.
And it's home to a variety of life, including oysters. Just beneath the surface, important work to restore oyster beds in Galveston Bay is underway.
Oysters are born into the water as just little microscopic larvae. So after about 2 weeks of life, they start to gain weight as they feed and then descend into the water column, and they go in search of something hard to attach to.
Haley Leha, Galveston Bay Foundation's Habitat Restoration Manager, explains oysters prefer to cement to other shells or oysters because they are reef-building organisms.
Sometimes those baby oysters will grow about 1 inch in 3 months. And just to give you some context, legal size here for commercial harvesting is 3 inches.
From served to shocked. Shannon Badd is Habitat Restoration Coordinator with GBF. Each week, Badd collects oyster shells from 26 restaurants throughout the greater Houston area.
Conservation and sustainability is very important to me and to our organization.
At the end of the day, when I've gone to all of our restaurants for that day, I take it to what we call our curing site, and that's where we dump the shell out onto the ground, and it will sit there for at least 6 months to get rid of all the contaminants on the shell.
There are millions of oyster shells at this curing site. That's about 1 acre.
So we're at our Red Bluff curing site. We separate it out into different piles so we know what's fresh shell and still needs to be cured or cleaned. And that shell then sits in a pile until it reaches about 18 inches. At that time, that pile is essentially stopped, and we move on to the next one to start a fresh pile.
Are you seeing success? Is your work paying off?
Definitely. We're seeing lots of success, particularly down in the West Bay part of the system. That's where it stayed a bit saltier, even with all the freshwater events coming through with Hurricane Harvey and those previous years of flooding. Northern parts of the Bay are still suffering quite a bit. So the reason we started all this is because there is a loss of this habitat. Hurricane Ike and other subsequent storms have brought in so much sediment, it literally covered up those reefs.
This is one of 5 sites where oyster restoration takes place. We are in Dickinson Bay. This effort is approximately 2.5 acres.
I'll put him back in his new home.
Once clean and cured, oyster shells are brought back to the bay, where they build and restore oyster beds to strengthen oyster populations and reduce coastal erosion.
Well, we hope you're acing our weather trivia, because here's another one. If 2 hurricanes of equal strength get too close to each other, what will happen? Will they A, form one stronger storm, B, weaken both storms, or C, rotate around each other? Stick around to find out. If 2 hurricanes of equal strength get too close to each other, what will happen? The correct answer is C. This is called the Fujiwara effect. It's very rare. In order for this to happen, there must be 2 tropical systems of similar strength in the same region at the same time. But it does happen. We hope you've had fun learning about weather trivia with us. The most important thing we want to convey as we head into hurricane season is this: be prepared. KPRC2 meteorologist Caroline Brown shows us the items you'll need for your family's hurricane survival kit.
Let's talk about your hurricane survival kit. This is one of the most useful tools, and it's important because you want to prepare so you don't panic later. Things you need to have in this could be a first aid kit. You want to put your medications into your kit. Also sanitation items such as toilet paper, soap, paper towels, and of course, you're going to need to have food. It's recommended to have at least 5 days worth of food, and expect your refrigerator not to be running. That means non-perishable items. Canned foods are a great option, but if you're gonna put the cans in there, also make sure you have your can opener. As for water, well, you need to have 1 gallon of water per person in your family per day. This is going to be used for drinking and sanitation. So a family of 4 would need to have 20 gallons of water. Of course, another important piece, that's going to be your important documents. We're talking marriage license, birth certificate, passports. Make sure you put these in a waterproof container. That way, none of them get damaged and you're not looking around for them at the last minute. Of course, another important part about hurricane prep is going to be thinking about your pets. In fact, I'm joined by Angelina. She's from the Houston Humane Society, and Layla, here to just give us a few tips when it comes to preparedness, because you have to think about our pets.
Yes, please do not forget your pet. They are family. What you would need to prepare in a kit would be things, of course, like food. You want to put probably a 3 to 5 day supply of food in a Ziploc. Make sure it's waterproof. You don't want any water getting in your food, then it's ruined. Take some treats for enrichment, some toys for enrichment.
Angelina also recommends having easy access to your pet's vet records and up-to-date photos of your pet in case you get separated from them.
We've weathered many storms together, and our community is resilient. We hope you enjoyed learning about improvements and innovations being made across our area to help keep our families safe for years to come. Now is the time to make sure you're ready for anything that severe weather throws our way. Our KPRC2 Hurricane and Flood Survival Guide is a comprehensive resource for everything you need to know before, during, and after a storm. It's free and online now at clicktohouston.com/hurricane. Thank you for joining us. On behalf of the KPRC2 weather team, have a great night and stay safe.